In ancient times, when the desert winds whispered secrets in the dunes, there lived Abraham, a man of unshakable faith, chosen by God to be the father of many nations. But to human eyes, his path seemed uncertain. Sarah, his beloved wife, was barren, and the dream of seeing his descendants grow seemed to fade into the dry horizon of time. Sarah, in her pain and despair, decided to take a bold step. Tradition allowed that through her servant, an heir could be born. Thus Hagar, the Egyptian servant, was given to Abraham so that she could bear what would be his firstborn. And so Ishmael was born, the fruit of an act that seemed to be the solution to an ancient desire. The birth of Ishmael was not only the beginning of a new story for Abraham, but the fulfillment of a promise that seemed improbable. In those days, when each child was seen as a divine blessing, Ishmael was received with great joy and affection. Abraham, now old, looked to his son with hope, believing that he would be the one through whom the promise would be fulfilled. And Abraham listened to the voice of Sarai. And Sarai, Abram's wife, took Hagar, her maidservant, the Egyptian, after Abram had dwelt 10 years in the land of Canaan, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. Genesis 16, 2, 3. Ishmael grew up under the watchful eye of his father Abraham. That boy, born amidst tension and uncertainty, was the firstborn of a man who conversed with God himself. From an early age, Ishmael was seen as the personification of Abraham's future. The patriarch, already advanced in age, looked at his son with pride, believing that the promises made by the Lord could be fulfilled through him. When Ishmael turned 13, a special event marked his life and that of his father: circumcision. It was the sign of the covenant between God and Abraham, a pact that confirmed God's blessing on his descendants. Ishmael participated in this ritual, sealing his role in God's plan. Yet there was a silent cry in Abraham's heart. He loved Ishmael deeply, and in a moment of prayer, he asked God that his firstborn son would be the heir of the promises. But God's plan was greater than Abraham could imagine, and he promised something even greater. And God said, "Sarah thy wife shall bear thee a son indeed, and thou shalt call his name Isaac, and I will establish my covenant with him for an everlasting covenant, and with his seed after him. And as for Ishmael, I have heard thee. Behold, I have blessed him, and will make him fruitful, and will multiply him exceedingly. He shall beget 12 princes, and I will make him a great nation." Genesis 17, 19, 20. Years passed, and the long-awaited son of promise, Isaac, was born. Sarah's laughter, which had once been one of disbelief, now turned to true joy. Isaac, whose name meant laughter, was the direct fulfillment of God's covenant with Abraham and Sarah. However, where there had been only one son, there were now two. Ishmael, Abraham's firstborn, had grown strong and independent, but a sense of rivalry began to emerge within the family. During a special celebration, Ishmael, now a young boy, played with little Isaac. What seemed like a simple interaction between brothers, in Sarah's eyes, became a threat to her son's future. Sarah feared that Ishmael would challenge Isaac's place as the rightful heir to God's promises. In her heart, the mother of the promised child could not accept Ishmael's presence. Determined, she went to Abraham and demanded that Hagar and her Sarah's request was like a blow to Abraham's heart. How could he send away his beloved son? Ishmael was his own flesh and blood, and Abraham had invested love and hope in him. Yet God, in his infinite wisdom, comforted Abraham and assured him that Ishmael would not be forgotten. God's plan for Isaac was firm, but he also had great promises for Ishmael. And Sarah saw that the son of Hagar the Egyptian, whom she had borne to Abraham, was mocking. And she said to Abraham, "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not inherit with my son Isaac." And it displeased Abraham because of his son. But God said to Abraham, "Do not let it displease you because of the lad and because of your bondwoman. In all that Sarah says to you, listen to her voice, for in Isaac shall your seed be called." Genesis 21, 9, 12. The decision weighed on Abraham's heart like a stone. Seeing his son Ishmael leave, along with Hagar, felt like an open wound in his soul. Yet God's voice had comforted him, assuring him that Ishmael would not be forgotten. Abraham bid Hagar farewell, handing her a skin of water and bread for the journey ahead. Sorrow filled the air as mother and son set out for the desert of Beersheba, a lonely and unforgiving place. The desert proved to be cruel, with the sun blazing and the water running low. fear and despair began to surround Hagar and her son. When the last sip of water was consumed, Hagar could not bear to see Ishmael suffer. She placed him under a bush, walked away, and cried out silently. The future seemed uncertain, and death seemed near. But at that moment, when all seemed lost, a voice broke the silence. God heard Ishmael's cry, and once again his plan began to unfold. An angel of the Lord appeared to Hagar and renewed his promise. Ishmael would not only live, but from him would come a great nation. And then, as if a mist had been lifted, Hagar saw a well of water in the desert. God's provision was made manifest, and Ishmael, Abraham's son, was saved. Verse, and Abraham rose early in the morning and took bread and a bottle of water and gave them to Hagar, putting them on her shoulder. And he gave her the child and sent her away. And she went and wandered in the wilderness of Beersheba. And when the water in the bottle was consumed, she cast the child under one of the trees. And she went and sat down opposite, about a bowshot away. For she said, "Let me not see the death of the child." And she sat opposite and lifted up her voice and wept. And God heard the voice of the child. And the angel of God called to Hagar out of heaven, and said unto her, "What aileth thee, Hagar? Fear not, for God hath heard the voice of the child where he is." Genesis 21:14, 17. The desert, once a scene of despair, became the stage for a new life for Ishmael. Under the shade of palm trees, and to the sound of the wind blowing across the dunes, Ishmael grew strong and fearless. God was with him, and with each passing day, the son of Abraham became a great hunter, skilled with the bow and arrow. The desert, with all its aridity, shaped Ishmael's character, making him a survivor, a man who walked in the midst of God's promise. The solitude of the desert was only an illusion, for although it seemed far from everything and everyone, God never left Ishmael. The young man prospered, and according to the word of the Lord, Ishmael grew up and formed a family of his own. Hagar found an Egyptian wife for him, and soon his descendants began to multiply, just as God had promised. Every step Ishmael took, every arrow he shot, and every decision he made were constant reminders of God's covenant with him. The promise God made to Abraham was being fulfilled before his eyes. Ishmael, the son who seemed forgotten, would be the patriarch of a great nation. Verse, and God was with the lad, and he grew up, and he dwelt in the wilderness, and became an archer, and he dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother took him a wife out of the land of Egypt. Genesis 21:20, 21. The years passed, and time in its own peculiar way brought maturity to both Ishmael and Isaac, two brothers who, due to circumstances beyond their control, were separated in childhood. But the blood that united them was stronger than any distance. In Ishmael's heart, the echo of God's promise resounded, and in Isaac's brotherly love still found space, even after everything that had happened. And then the moment arrived. Abraham, the patriarch, the friend of God, had fulfilled his mission on earth. The news of his death reached both Ishmael and Isaac. This event, sad and solemn, became the opportunity for the two brothers to meet again. Before their father's grave, the tensions of the past were dispelled. What remained now was reverence and respect for the one who had walked side by side with the Most High God. Ishmael and Isaac buried Abraham together. At that moment, any feud or rivalry seemed small compared to the legacy they had inherited. Ishmael, now the head of his own lineage, had become the patriarch of a great nation, as God had promised. Ishmael's sons formed tribes that populated the desert, and his name was recorded in history as the father of the Ishmaelites, a nomadic people who inhabited the vast desert regions. Verse, then Abraham breathed his last and died in a good old age, an old man and full of days, and he was gathered to his people. And Isaac and Ishmael his sons buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre. Genesis 25:8, 9. The days of Ishmael were also over. The man who had survived the desert, who had been protected by God and whose strong hands had wielded the bow with skill, was now ready to join his ancestors. He had lived a long and full life, full of challenges and victories, always under the watchful eye of the God who promised to make him a great nation. Ishmael had 12 sons, and these sons became leaders of tribes, forming the 12 princes who would give rise to the Ishmaelites. They lived in the regions between Havilah and Shur, along the trade routes that crossed the desert. Like his father Abraham, Ishmael saw his descendants multiply and spread across vast lands. Ishmael's people prospered, nomads in the endless sands of the desert, but never forgetting the promise that had been given to them. Although the Bible ends its story with few words, Ishmael's mark remains to this day. He lived 137 years, and his descendants continued their journey, keeping alive the story of the one who had been the firstborn of Abraham, the son of the promise of a great nation. Verse. And these are the days of the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. And he breathed his last, and died, and was gathered to his people. And they dwelt from Havilah unto Shur, which is before Egypt, as thou goest toward Ashur. And Ishmael dwelt before the face of all his brethren. Genesis 25, 17, 18. And so we conclude the story of Ishmael, the firstborn son of Abraham, whose life was marked by challenges, promises, and a legacy that spanned generations. If you enjoyed this narrative and want to continue following more biblical stories that teach and inspire us, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your participation is essential so that we can continue bringing content that touches the heart and nourishes faith. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.